The Nurse Theorists, Portraits of Excellence, Volume 2. In this edition, we feature Dr. Helen Erickson.
I am a very, very fortunate person. Early in life, I was given permission to make choices that enabled me to select meaningful pathways in my life journey. As a result, I've lived a rich and fulfilling, yet very simple life. I was born in the depth of depression in Clare, Michigan, a small Midwestern town. When I was 5, World War II was declared. I remember the food and the shoe rationing, the air raids and the blackouts. We lived about 2 miles outside of town. I had one older brother and 2 younger sisters. We spent a lot of time listening to the radio, playing games, reading, or playing outside. Our weekends included the Sunday afternoon drive. We went out looking for deer and blackberry bushes. Dad hunted so we could have meat on the table, and Mom used the blackberries to make jelly for the winter. I had 2 aunts who influenced my life. My Aunt Ella, who loved nursing, was a jolly, happy woman. I liked to be with her. I guess I decided that to be a nurse was to be happy. I also loved to go to my Aunt Lecty, who taught me what unconditional acceptance was. My parents taught me to be independent, to trust myself, and to look for the best in others. They also taught me to stay true to my beliefs and to set priorities, to enjoy my work. They influenced my decision to make my family my first priority, no matter what the consequences. The first 6 months in nursing school, we weren't allowed to go out after 10:30 at night. Later, we were allowed to stay out on the weekends until exactly 12 p.m. on the dot. We worked split shifts, many evenings and nights. In essence, we staffed the hospital. Miss Phillips was one of my first instructors. She taught me to focus on the person, not the disease, and she encouraged me to think outside the box. When I was a junior, I met Lance. He was completing his master's degree. We were married a year later. He's been my life partner and is my soulmate. His parents, Betty and Milton Erickson, exposed me to new and exciting ways to think about the nature of human beings. During my first meeting with them, I learned about mind-body relations and my ability to help people get well by using their own inner resources. Dad taught me the importance of understanding the worldview of clients. And Mom, she taught me the essence of unconditional acceptance. Dad coined the words modeling and role modeling as we use it in this theory. I graduated from nursing school in August 1957. When we were married a week later, then left Michigan and headed for Midland, Texas. Lance had started a job there a few months before, and I'd accepted his job as a head nurse in the emergency room. There were no interns or residents, so I had to call in the staff doctors when a patient came into the ER. Doctors didn't always show up, so I had to learn to be resourceful and confident. When our first daughter was born, I knew immediately that my family would be my first priority. I've often had to choose between career and family. Family always won when it was important. When we returned to Michigan, I worked in a hospital for the handicapped. People who were considered too different to be mainstream knew how to share themselves and to be honest about their feelings. They reinforced my beliefs about the human need for dignity and respect. After we had our second daughter, we were invited to Puerto Rico to work at Inter-American University. Lance is a teacher and I as a nurse. We accepted without reservation. After 3 months, I decided that the healthcare system needed revamping, so I took a proposal to the president and became the director of health services. I worked with 23 doctors and 3 nurses. Had a wonderful time. Our first son, third child, was born in Puerto Rico. We returned to the States in 1963 and settled in Ann Arbor so Lance could pursue his PhD. In 65, our second son, fourth child, was born. 2 years later, I went to work at the University of Michigan Hospital. Most of the time, I worked in a medical surgical unit for tertiary care patients. I believed it was good for me to pursue my career, but I also knew our children needed me at home, so I worked evenings and nights, part-time. This was my era of behind-closed-doors nursing. I practiced my model care even though I knew it wouldn't be accepted by my colleagues, if they knew. So I did it, but didn't talk about it. I closed the door and connected with the patient and the family in my own style. During this time, Lance and I were busy raising our children, attending PTA meetings, helped with the homework, attended school plays, had family outings on the weekends, and took family trips in the summer. Our careers were important, but our family was more important. We wanted our children to know they were top priority. In 1970, I met Mary Ann Swain. Mary Ann impacted me in many ways. She reinforced my ability to think outside the box, supported my ideas of nursing, challenged me to clarify them, and she encouraged me to return to school. First, I resisted her suggestions. I loved my practice as a staff nurse, and I was a very busy mother and wife. Couldn't imagine what could be gained with more education. But in 1972, I decided that I needed to learn how to label and articulate what I'd been doing in practice. I completed my BSN in 1974, accepted a position in Michigan's RN BSN program, and immediately went on to get a combined master's degree in psychiatric and med-surg nursing. I met Evelyn Tomlin that fall. We hit it off immediately. Ev listened to my ideas and validated them with her own clinical experience. We spent hours talking about what we were learning, what was true to nursing, and what was not. During grad school, I developed and tested the APAM model and then graduated in 1976. In 1977, Mary Ann received an NIH grant to study hypertension and offered me the opportunity to design a study using my model of nursing. After that, we studied the effects of this model on the well-being of people with diabetes and opened a nurse-managed center. I started working on my PhD studying self-care knowledge, continued working in the School of Nursing, and also worked with Jenny James, director of the surgical units, consulted in the hospital, presented keynotes, researched papers, and so forth. Ev and Mary Ann consistently encouraged me to write what had come to be known as Helen Erickson's self-care model. Then they said they'd help. A few months later, we had a book written and agreed to title it Modeling and Role Modeling. It was published in 1983, completed my PhD in 84. During this time, I was very honored to have time with such nurse leaders as Faye Abdullah, Virginia Henderson, Martha Rogers, and others who visited Michigan. I was also instrumental in bringing Miss Lee, the very first nurse to be allowed out of communist China, to visit with us at the University of Michigan. Rita Duma was dean of the School of Nursing, was also a very wonderful friend and mentor. I also received the Amico Good Teaching Award from the University of Michigan during this time. In 1986, Lance retired from the University of Michigan, and we moved to South Carolina, where I joined Connie Baker at the School of Nursing. Before we left, Carolyn Kenny decided to start a modeling and role modeling society. She drafted bylaws, organized a meeting to sign a charter. We formed the Society for the Advancement of Modeling and Role Modeling. Mary Ann, Ev, myself, Mickey, our oldest daughter, and 30 others were charter members. When we got to South Carolina, I was Associate Academic Dean of Nursing. I also started a private practice. I was the first nurse in South Carolina to receive board approval for private practice in holistic nursing. In 1988, Dolores Sands recruited me at the University of Texas as Chair of Adult Health. While at the University of Texas, I taught undergraduate and graduate students and supervised many doctoral dissertations. 2 of my trips to Taiwan were to teach modeling and role modeling to the faculty at one of the schools. My last funded research project team studied the effects of modeling and role modeling on persons with Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers. In 1996, I was awarded lifetime certification in holistic nursing by the American Holistic Nurses Association. In 1997, I retired from UT. That time, the Helen L. Erickson Endowed Lectureship in Holistic Nursing was established, and I was awarded an emeritus faculty position. Since then, I've been busy writing, consulting, and speaking. I also chair the American Holistic Nurses Certification Board. 2006, I edited a second book on modeling and role modeling, expanding original concepts and clarifying others. We're currently working on another book that will help educators teach modeling and role modeling. I suspect I'll continue to be involved in nursing as long as I am able. It's a part of who I am. I love having fun with my colleagues. I also love being a grandmother and having time with my adult children. I can honestly say that my life journey, which includes both professional and personal experiences, has enabled me to discover my life purpose and to do my soul work. I'm a very, very fortunate person.
In an interview at the University of Texas at Austin School of Nursing, Dr. Erickson discussed her theory, Modeling and Role Modeling, with Dr. Martha Alligood.
Helen, I'm so pleased to be here with you today and to have you share with our viewers about modeling and role modeling, for them to hear that in your own voice.
Oh, thank you, Martha. I'm so honored to be here. I just can't tell you how honored I am to be here with you today. This is just really delightful.
I think the viewers would really be interested in hearing you tell how this all began. Can you talk to us about that?
I think there are 2 ways to talk about that. The first is, where did the philosophy or the basic beliefs come from? And the second is, how did those concepts that are derived from those beliefs, how did they get labeled and articulated and written as a theory? Mm-hmm. The first, I think, is just a part of who I am. My life experiences taught me that people are inherently good, that people want to be the most that they can be. We make lots of mistakes, but we want to be the most that we can be. So there's a philosophy that underlies modeling and role modeling. But then in addition to that, not just my philosophy, but other people's have imposed on me. For instance, one of my faculty members, I remember her sending me into the room. We were perhaps 6 weeks into nursing training, you know, in the diploma days, how that went. Well, and she sent me into the room to check on a patient. And I came back out saying, oh, the IV's running. I thought I was so proud of myself, I could tell that that IV was running. And she grabbed me by the back of the collar and she said, don't you ever do that again. Don't I do what? And she proceeded to explain to me that you look at the face, then the person, and then the equipment. That was extremely profound. That taught me something at a very cellular level about what nursing was about. Then a year later, I met my father-in-law, Milton Erickson. And I hadn't expected him to be anybody other than just a father. And then when I discovered what he was pretty well known, it was kind of a surprise to me. But we went to a conference and I learned a lot about hypnosis at that conference. And at that time, now I was a nursing student, Martha, and at that time we had a lot of patients who had hysterectomies. And after hysterectomies, they had to have catheters installed or instilled, and they would get infections. And so I talked to Milton Erickson. I will probably call Dad through this conversation, but and talked to him about it. And he said, well, you can do things about that. He always put it back on me whenever I'd ask him. And so I went and did my first experiment. This was in '56, before I graduated from my diploma program. The night before 3 of those people were to have surgery, I went in and rubbed their back. You know, we did PM.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We did all of that.
Yeah.
And I did rub their back. And for the first lady, I told her that I'd be there the next evening and that she didn't need to worry, that I'd take care of her. And for the second one, I did the same thing. And then I said, and when you hear my voice and feel this, you'll be able to relax. And for the third one, I said the same thing. And then I said, and the rivers will run freely. So when I went on duty the next night, I could hardly wait to find out what was going to happen. Well, the first one she just could not go to the bathroom, no matter how much water we read in the faucet. Tickle, you remember how we used to drip it over you? Okay. Yeah. Well, anyway, and the second lady, after a little bit of water running, she was able to get up and go to the bathroom. The third lady could hardly wait to get out of the bed. She had to go so fast. From that, I learned that people have inner resources, that it's our job to facilitate them, to mobilize those. And that was extremely powerful to me. But I also knew that that was not what other people called nursing. So I was very quiet about what I learned. Those 2 people were extremely important in terms of helping me develop my philosophy, my beliefs about what nursing was. So for a long time, I did what I call behind closed door nursing. I did my nursing as I had evolved. And of course, I had a family. They taught me about normal growth and development and how needs relate to development and how needs relate to loss and how you have to resolve loss in order to be able to go on, etc. But it was several years later, in '72, when I went back to school. And at that time, I knew Mary Ann Swain. I had met Mary Ann Swain, who influenced me to go to school. And I learned that you can label these ideas. And so it was through going to school that I learned to label and articulate the ideas. It was through knowing Mary Ann Swain and Evelyn Tomlin, who said, you must write this. Because as time went by, you can't imagine how many places I had begun to talk. I came out, I opened the door and came out, Martha. Yeah. You know, and I talked to people about what it was I was doing, because I was getting a lot of calls from different places.
So, Helen, they helped you formalize what was there.
What they did for me is they validated that modeling and role modeling was an acceptable way to think about nursing. I knew it, and I was going to do it. I was determined that that's what I was. But not a lot of people agreed with me at that time. So they helped me conceptualize it, and then when it came time to write it, I wrote most of the book, and then they did a lot of editorial. and mandated that I clarify. And that was extremely important. And you can't just say that needs and loss is related. You have to clarify and explain how theoretically they're related and what the importance is for practice.
And that was at a time that nursing theory was just beginning to be used also.
Well, I have to tell you, Martha Rogers came to Michigan at that time, and she also impacted me because she, you know, everybody was so excited Martha Rogers was coming to Michigan. She was just so profound in the profession. And I remember sitting there in the crowd, and Martha stood up, and you know how Martha would do. She said, "How many have read my book?" "Oh, I've read your book, you know, Martha." She said, "Okay." She said, "You go to page 8 and tear out 8 to 23 because I've changed my mind." That was an incredible experience for me because at that moment in time, I learned that you can put something in writing and change your mind. And that gives you freedom to articulate what it is you know to be true in your heart.
Helen, I think people will be interested in hearing about the organization that has been formed around modeling and role modeling, that community of scholars that have come together in that organization. And I see you have your pin on today.
Yes,
so
I do.
Can you share with us about that?
Well, the society was organized in '86. This is the logo for the society. It's also the logo, of course, for the original book. And if you look at it, you'll notice that there are two people that are linked arm in arm. And actually, it shows a man and a woman, but it doesn't have to be. It needs to be two people because what that symbolizes is that human beings need to be connected at the same time that they need to be individuated or have a sense of self-identity. And this happens across the lifespan, from brand new infant all the way until you take your last breath. And we call that in modeling and role modeling affiliated individuation. So this is symbolized in the logo. In addition to that, if you look at it, people are, the nurse is represented by the hand. The hand has a long arm. And what that symbolizes then is that nurses don't control people. They facilitate and they nurture people. They buoy them up. They help them become the most that they can be. And the long arm symbolizes the fact that at any point in time when we interface with a human being, that experience can impact them years and years later. It's a seeding process where what we do now will grow and grow and grow. So I call it the long arm effect, that nursing has the ability to affect people throughout their lifespan, even though they may only interact with them for a few minutes. So this is the logo of the society. The society meets every 2 years, and the alternate for conferences. And the alternate year we have retreats where we just brainstorm.
Can you give us a little bit of a brief overview of modeling and role modeling? I think that would help the viewers understand the focus of your work.
Well, modeling does not mean to set good examples. What it means is to try to step into someone's world and understand from their perspective a mirror image of their world. And it'll never be perfect, Martha. We cannot really fully understand another human being, but we can try. We can try to understand what they're talking about in terms of what their needs are, what their losses are, whether they're in a grieving state. It's that whole sense of trying to understand that human being's life experiences and worldview at that moment in time. So that's what modeling means. Now, role modeling means, for instance, the word role comes out. I believe that all human beings want to live a fulfilling life. They want to live roles of their choice. And so once we understand their model of the world, we plan interventions purposefully that will help them live those roles that they want to be. And it has to be within the context of their perceptions. We might think, for instance, that an executive at Ford Motors, his perceived or choice role would be to be the boss. But his choice role, if you really listen to what he's saying, might be to be the father. And those are different. So then our responsibility is to help them sort those things through and to try to facilitate them to live the most meaningful life that they can with the highest sense of well-being.
So that's why you would look at the patient so broadly.
And people say, have always said, well, this sounds very complicated and it takes a lot of time. But I don't buy that at all. I've staff nursed for many, many years and consulted in many, many hospitals. And I can tell you that if you connect heart to heart with a person, if you walk in their room with presence and intent, it takes seconds to model their world, to understand the beginning. And then as time goes by, more of it peels off. But you can do that very, very fast. So that's the essence of modeling and role modeling. The person-centered focus, and I mean person-centered focus, I mean their view of the world. Not just attending to that person, but their view of the world is your primary source of information.
Helen, I want you to say a little bit more about that, because sometimes in nursing, the focus does get off of the patient.
Well, lots of people have disagreed with me about that. I mean, and that's okay. There's lots of room in the world for everybody. But my sense is, unless we listen to what that person is presenting. Here's a simple example. I remember one woman who this was when I was a staff nurse years ago at Michigan. Everybody had sort of given up on her, that she was just going to decline and die because she had given up on herself. And when I went into the room and asked her what it was that would make her happy, she wanted her bird. She wanted her bird brought into her room. Well, fortunately, I had enough, what can I say? I was able to bring the bird in for her to talk to for a little while, and then I had the son take it back out and leave pictures, so we had pictures all around her room. Miraculously, she got better and went home. But it's just a simple thing sometimes like that. But it does mean stepping outside the box and thinking about the world differently. It doesn't mean attending to the technical skills. It does mean you know how to do those technical skills, but you do them within the context of that human being's world.
So listening's incredibly important.
Listening, active listening. You have to listen to that person. You have to listen.
Okay, that's very interesting. Well, Helen, as you know, I used this work for a year and a half as a consultant at University of Tennessee Medical Center. And one of the things that nurses talked to me about was how much attending to the resources and learning about the patient's resources had changed their practice. Can you say more about that?
Well, resources is a part of the self-care. And the way we define self-care is that there are three aspects to it. One is self-care knowledge, and that's what do people know about themselves at some level that's interfered with their ability to grow and to live the highest quality life possible. And what is it that they need to help them do that, okay? So there's self-care knowledge. Then there's self-care actions. What is it that people do to get their needs met? And then there's the third, is resources. What kind of resources do people have? Internal resources and external resources. And just because we think they're there doesn't mean they perceive they're there. So it's very important to explore with people what resources they think that they have. I've had many people who nurses would be upset with because they were too, quote unquote, dependent on the nurses. And I said, from their perspective, they don't have the internal resources. What we have to do is facilitate them to build those, to mobilize those. There's another piece to that too, and that is the APAM model, which I first began to think about when I was a diploma student. And of course, in those days, there wasn't much written about stress. It's also the thing that I did as a nurse in practice, long before I went back to school. I had identified the fact that there were two different kinds of clients. I categorized them. And one was those who needed direct care and those who needed indirect care. And what I determined was those who needed indirect care were people who simply needed me to actively listen, help them figure out what they needed to do, and validate that and reinforce it and give information sometimes. Those who needed direct care were those people who were just unable to help themselves at that moment in time. They were too sad, they were too fatigued, they were too stressed, they were just too impoverished. So when I went to grad school, I discovered Cellier in my undergraduate, and then I discovered Cellier at that time, and I developed the APAM model, the adaptive potential model, which it categorizes whether a person is able to mobilize those resources we were talking about. And there are 3 different states. There's the equilibrium, where people are fairly able to do it. There's the state of arousal where they're doing it, but the risk then is can deplete themselves if they're not getting help. Those are what I used to call the indirect clients, okay? And then there's the impoverished person that simply can't pull it together. My research on that has shown that impoverished people are much more statistically likely to die, much more statistically like to be infected unless there's an intervention that occurs. Mm-hmm. So the resources, I think, is extremely important, but it's a part of the bigger picture. It's their self-care. How able are people to mobilize those resources depends on their self-care knowledge, and then, of course, their self-care actions. We have to look at what it is they're doing, whether it's helping them from their perspective and from our perspective as well, or whether it's not. One of the clients that I worked with early on was a woman who'd been in the hospital 365 days, full year, with diabetes. Very impoverished, but when I asked the nurses what they thought about her, they all just loved her because she could do all of her own teaching, she could do all her own sticks, etc. She was very unable to mobilize resources. So when I looked at her actions, what she was doing was what she needed to do to get connected to people, but it was not healthy. Okay, so what I had to do with her then is help her identify self-care actions that she could do and still stay connected so that she could go out into out of the hospital and go home. And she ended up being a paramedic. So, you know, these are the kinds of experiences I've had with self-care, which is actions, resources, and knowledge.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. And the other thing I was interested in hearing you talk about is the basic aims, or those
yes.
aims.
The aims came about when I was in graduate school, and I'd met Evelyn in graduate school, and I was in a dual program, master's in med-surg and psych, because I believed in holism and wasn't going to compromise on that no matter what. But we were supposedly studying the nursing process, and one of the things we had to do was set these goals. And I just insisted that goals are not the issue, it's the aims that's an issue. And maybe it's a fine line there. But when you talk about goals, it's something that the nurse does. And when you talk about the aims, it's what the nurse does to facilitate something in another person. So for instance, building a trusting, functional relationship is the first aim. The idea of it's functional, meaning that it's reciprocal, that it works back and forth between the nurse and the client, and that it facilitates their growth. Another aim was to promote control, a sense of control in the person, to mobilize and help them build their strengths, to have them promote a sense of self-orientation. At first I called that a sense of hope, but then I discovered people had this notion that hope was, oh, I hope I get a new dress, or I hope I win the lottery, and that's not what I wanted. Mm-hmm. I wanted us to understand that what our responsibility is as nurses is to help people have a sense of dignity and respect for themselves, and we can only do that if we respect them. So that was another aim. So it's what we do in our interventions that aims to help these things happen in another human being. Not that goals aren't important, but the goals were get them to walk out in the hall tomorrow. What does that mean? And unless you really help the person mobilize their resources, they can't walk in the hall tomorrow. So that's what the aims were about.
I think next we'd like to talk a little bit about how the modeling and role modeling has been used in practice, in education, in research, and the contributions those have made. Can you share with us about that?
I'll start with the research, the last one. I have chaired more than 40 doctoral dissertations and numerous masters, and many of those people have gone on into the world to do additional research. A number of them have just done some really nice work. A lot of that research, in fact, the vast majority of that research is either to test the theory itself, test the impact of interventions designed based on modeling and role modeling, or to test some of the theoretical propositions, or to develop new tools to measure the concepts, because we find often that we borrow tools to use to do research that don't really measure the concepts that we're trying to test. as we define them.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the research has been done in that respect. In terms of practice, I will have to say probably the most powerful person, and I use that word very purposefully, is Jenny James in terms of practice. Jenny James has been an executive in nursing from Michigan to Wisconsin to Pennsylvania to Tennessee, as you know, to Oregon. And every place she's gone, she's taken modeling and role modeling with her and seeded it. In Boston at Brigham Hospital, she seeded modeling, role modeling throughout. So it's been used very widely. It's being used in a lot of other places that Jenny hasn't been, because it's identified as one of the extant holistic nursing theories by HNA. And so there's a number of other places that are using it in practice. In education, what can I say? That's been my life. I mean, I've practiced and interfaced that with education. I don't believe that you're either an educator or a researcher or a practitioner. I've always melded those all together. So even when I was teaching graduate students, I would take them over to the hospital to demonstrate how you think about this, so that they themselves could observe and label then what they were making observations.
Sometimes I think how we've separated those, we've created an artificial separation.
Absolutely.
That isn't useful.
And you know, each person has to do what's comfortable for them. For me, because this is so much a part of who I am, those have to be melded together. And I think when we take graduate students, we talk to them about the client's self-care knowledge as an example, which is looking into their world and understanding that. And then we take them over to the hospital to see what this means. And I'll just give you a brief example of this. I had a group of graduate students here at UT that I was teaching modeling and role modeling, and they just simply could not get this notion of self-care knowledge. So I said, we'll go over to Breckenridge, which is just across the street here. And I took them in and I said to the staff nurse, now I have a group of nurses here and I'm going to teach them how to assess clients. Is there anybody here that they shouldn't attend to, or we shouldn't bother because the person's just too sick to be bothered by all of us coming in? And she said, well, no, but there's a lady down in 202 that doesn't speak English, so don't bother with her. So I turned to the students and I said, that's where we go immediately. Well, in a very short time, when I went down and started talking with this, unfortunately I can speak a little bit of Spanish, but not a lot, enough so that I could communicate a little. What we learned in 5 minutes, Martha, from this woman who was in the hospital to have her breast removed for cancer, what we learned from her was the reason that she was sick was because she couldn't speak and write English, so she was being deported. Now, she had 2 sons and a husband who were Americanized citizens, and they were going to stay. She was being deported. That was extremely distressful to her. Because she was so distressed, she'd fallen and broken her finger. Because she'd fallen and broken her finger and didn't have health care, she got an infection. So then she had to come to the hospital. When she was in the hospital, they discovered this breast cancer. And I mean, it's the scenario just unfolded right in front of us of what this woman perceived to be connected to another thing. Well, it didn't take me any time at all. I just walked around the room and I said, what is this? And she said it in English. What is this? She said it in English. I said, we don't have a problem here. You speak English just fine. The only problem you have is you don't know the oath in English. Now, do you have a tape recorder? Does your son have a tape recorder? Yes, he had a tape recorder. I said, I want him to write that, to speak into the tape recorder the entire oath to pledge allegiance to the United States and bring that to you, and you memorize that. The next day we went in, and there was a smile from ear to ear. This lady was NPO to go to surgery. She didn't care about going to surgery. She knew that she could make that pledge and stay in this country. That's what I talk about, stepping into that world and understanding that. Even as you're taking care of the IVs, getting her ready to go to surgery, even as you're taking care of her. She went home in 2 days. But I could have predicted, Martha, because modeling and role modeling also is based in the idea of holism, mind, body, spirit, that what affects our mind affects our body at the cellular level. So I could have predicted that if that woman hadn't had that experience, she would have been impoverished the next day. She would not have had the immune response that she needed. She might have gotten infected. We don't know what could have happened to her.
So you're looking at people holistically.
Very much,
Absolutely
absolutely.
holistic. Yes. That's really interesting, and I think the viewers will be very interested in that.
I hope so.
Yes.
That's very, very important.
Helen, what do you consider your most important work? Would it be modeling and role modeling?
I think it's been a vehicle for me, and I'm honored beyond belief that so many people have picked it up and recognized it and used it to make better lives for other people. I really think my major contribution to nursing is to advance holistic nursing. And I think modeling and role modeling has done that. That was the fourth goal that the Society for the Advancement of Modeling and Role Modeling identified. So I think that that's one of my major accomplishments or contributions to nursing. I think the other is the notion that we start with a person's world, that we fully understand as much as we're able to. Remember, you never get a clear picture, but as much as we're able to, how that person's experiencing the world. And we validate that. We recognize that. We act on that, even if it only takes seconds. Even as we're working in the ICU. I've had lots of ICU experience, by the way, so this works across the board. So I think those are my two major contributions to nursing.
As we complete this interview, is there anything else you'd like to share with the viewers?
Well, I never started out to write a theory. I started out to live my life. And that's where I still am, is what's important is for each of us to live our life step at a time. I've had so many nurses who said, oh, I could never do what you've done. And I said, yes, you do, because it's a journey. You just take one step at a time. And you don't say, I'm going to be important, or I'm going to have my video done, or any of that sort of thing. You just live to your values. You establish your priorities and your beliefs, and you live to that. And then let it take you where it goes. I think that's important for young nurses particularly to understand.
And so where all did that take you?
Well, it brought me here. But I can tell you, Martha, 20 years ago, I would have never, ever guessed that I'd be here. Never. That was not my intent. My intent was to be a good nurse, to practice nursing as I believed it, but my first priority was my family. So my intent was to meld those two lives together in a way that would be meaningful to me and meaningful to others, because it can't be just about me. It has to be about other people as well.
Helen, I want to thank you for this interview today. It's just been wonderful to speak with you and to hear about modeling and role modeling, and to hear about your life and what this work has meant to you throughout your career. And I know the viewers are going to be so pleased to hear this as well. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Martha. It's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful opportunity for me and a great honor. Thank you so much. Now that I'm 72 and my husband is 76, I look forward to the rest of the journey. I don't know where it'll take me, but I do know that my life purpose has been to nurture growth in others. And as I do that, I grow and become even more of who I am to be. Modeling and role modeling has been one vehicle for fulfilling my life purpose. It's my hope that it will continue to enrich the lives of those who find that it resonates with their worldview. While some may say that I could have been more productive professionally, I'm certain that what I have done with my life will live on beyond my time. My daughter will carry on my legacy in professional nursing, as will Sam Ram. And my children and other people that I've affected and touched through the time will carry on some of the ideas.